Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much for coming for a start. Just by way of introduction, I was a student at the University of Leicester. I studied English. I was in the Students' Union Exec there for 2 years, and I started as Vice President of NUS in July. And it's no more timely to talk about higher education funding than now. I'm sure lots of you will know that in 2004, fees that were at £1,000, or they'd crept up to £1,300, were increased to £3,000, and that was a decision taken in Parliament based on a review of the £1,000 fees. Now that was a really contentious increase, and the Blair government, which was a huge landslide majority, came to within 5 votes of being defeated. That was closer than the Blair government had been defeated, had come to being defeated than ever before, closer even than the war in Iraq. And that was because the issue of higher education funding was a topical one. It was popular with the public, it was something that students mobilised on, and it meant that it was a really difficult decision to get through Parliament. But they did, and unfortunately we're stuck with a really seriously problematic system. And I'll come on to say why I think the current system is a deeply flawed one. And I should say at the outset now, NUS's position isn't to keep fees at £3,000. It's also not to say that we should be moving back to free education, and I think that's where the major sort of difference lies between myself and Adam. And I feel I can justify why we don't think that a return to free education is something that we should be campaigning on as the top line message, because that will see us sidelined, and anything else that we might say that might actually be helpful towards building a better system will be completely sidetracked. But I also would say to students' unions and to students that believe that our message should be free education, that I would encourage you to contact your local MPs, to make an issue of it and to demonstrate on it, because I think NUS needs to be more honest about the fact that although our overall position might not be to campaign for free education, we have to be honest that there are students' unions within NUS that do have that position, and I think we should support you where we can. Right, I'm going to just try now and justify why our position isn't free education and it's looking for something different. On average, £8,500 is being spent on each full-time student, undergrad student in higher education. And each full-time student is contributing just over £3,000 toward that in the current system, £3,145 in this academic year. So that's roughly between a quarter and a third of the total cost. It's not out of the question to say that the government can, if the government can afford to bail out Northern Rock, or it can afford Trident nuclear replacement, or it can afford the war in Iraq, that it can't afford more money to be spent on higher education. But governments don't work on, let's just take, governments work on what are political priorities. And unfortunately, when they go around knocking on doors, the things that come out much higher than higher education are spending on health, spending on the police, spending on primary school education, spending on secondary school education, spending on transport and on policing. Higher education doesn't even feature in terms of the top 10 in terms of bringing it down to free education. But I do believe the current system is a flawed one because people are put off by the level of debt with which they leave higher education. I think Adam will accept when he says that education should be free, and I turn around to him and say, well, that means someone has to pay for it. I'm sure he accepts that. It's not free. Obviously, someone has to pay for it. And without sort of preempting what he's going to say, he'll probably say that the richest people in society should pay for it. Something like a 50% tax on people that earn £100,000 or more. Well, I think that the system that NUS is going to come up with is actually not a million miles away from that. The new system that we would want to see is that the only people that pay for free education are those that go through the system and start earning money afterwards, and a percentage is taken from their income. It should be a progressive system whereby the more that you earn, the more that you pay. That, for me, is not too dissimilar from an extension of the income tax system. But the reason why I think a graduate-based system is more winnable is because I don't think it's fair to charge people that haven't gone through the system themselves. Now, some people will say, Alan Sugar, for instance, didn't go to university, but surely he does benefit from higher education. And of course he does, because people in his organisation do, and society benefits as a generality from higher education. But people already pay for higher education through the general taxation system. So I think it's fair that the vast majority of money in higher education does come from general taxation, and it does presently. But I do think that a fairer way of collecting a student contribution would be a progressive taxation system based on your earnings afterwards. The current system means that if you graduate and you become a nurse, or you graduate and you become a high-flying lawyer or a city banker, you pay exactly the same for your higher education. And that, for me, is fundamentally wrong, and that's why the current system is one that I don't support. And if NUS manages to achieve the cap staying at £3,000, in my mind, frankly, that isn't an achievement. It isn't an achievement, because we've still got a system whereby it's a market-based system, and I don't think that markets should operate in higher education in terms of fees. But what I will say is I think a fairer way of collecting a student contribution is a progressive form of a graduate taxation. That's where I think the major difference lies. Mine is simply one targeted at graduates, and I think Adam's is one that's targeted at society as a whole. I'll stop there because I think it's more important that we get a debate rather than a speech. Thanks very much.